Two Kids in a Career is produced by Jill Devine Media.
Just make sure your toolbox is full and that you have the right things to get you to the next step.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. I never like to go into this with all patients, but I was raised that prayer is your first medicine.
Yep.
And when you start there, what comes afterwards is up to you to follow through with. So there are people who come in the door and they're just like, I'm feeling like this could be helpful. I don't want to get in the way of that. And there are going to be people who just say, absolutely not, I'm not doing it. I will support you just the same. That's why I always go back. It's up to you.
Two Kids in a Career is brought to you by Blondin Real Estate. They're a family-owned boutique-style brokerage with over 40 years of experience serving the counties that surround St. Louis. See the properties they have to offer at blondinrealestate.com. That's blondinrealestate.com. Hi there, and welcome to Two Kids in a Career. I'm Jill Devine. As an entrepreneur, wife, and mama, the daily grind of trying to build a business while taking care of kids and trying to maintain a healthy connection with my hubby, it's a lot. With this podcast, you're going to hear candid conversations with other moms, parenting experts who can share their knowledge and insight, or you'll just hear me rambling to get it all out. There's going to be tears, there's going to be laughter, but most importantly, there will be support. Take a listen and connect with me so we can grow and learn from one another. This is Two Kids and a Career. Welcome to Season 6, Episode 73 of the podcast. Don't forget to stick around until the end of the episode to hear this week's Supermom Shoutout brought to you by Addie's Way. All right, this conversation today, it's really kind of interesting to me because I hope or want to listen back to this episode in 5 years and be like, what in the heck were these people thinking? Like, why is this such a big conversation to have? But as with anything, sometimes you have to have those conversations to get to, I don't know, would you call it like the norm, that it's just something that you talk about every day? Jamila, would you say that maybe before I start telling people exactly what we're talking about?
Yeah, I think life, if nothing else, in this past year has taught us to be flexible and open and
Yep.
forgiving to many things. I've had to challenge many of my own personal, thoughts and ideologies. So an industry that is burgeoning with that challenge every single day for many people, I think, is showing and proving that it is more important and will become a kind of mainstay in our homes. So.
Yeah, so what we are going to talk about, get yourself ready if you're not used to this or you're like, what? We are going to talk about cannabis. And what I want to do is educate. This is what I want this episode to be about. First of all, Jamila is a doctor, and I have lots of questions for you. And you are part of this cannabis world, and it's so kind of risque to some people. I will say, being in St. Louis in the Midwest, it's definitely a little bit more risque than, in other parts of the country. But one thing that I have talked a lot about in this podcast for this year is that the word I chose for 2021 is self-care.
Mm,
And I believe self-care is not just about the action, but it's also about the research. And it's also about looking into things that maybe you wouldn't normally look into. And I think that the cannabis world is something that definitely can help with self-care. I don't know enough as far as the medical marijuana side of it. I just know marijuana from I mean, like most people, it's a drug and people would just use it to get high.
mhm.
So that's where I think, and you know that on your end, what most people think of. They don't really
Sure.
realize what cannabis is. And I will say to the listener that you and I did have a conversation before this. And one thing that you brought up so many great points to me, but one thing that really kind of resonated with me was that this is a plant-based medicine. And so this whole idea of plant-based healing, which I've already started looking at for my own well-being, it didn't even hit me. Like, cannabis is part of that.
Mm-hmm.
So we have lots of things to discuss, but we should probably talk about why you're qualified to talk about these things with me. So, Dr. Jamila Owens-Todd, she is joining me right now. Let's talk about your past. Let's talk about what you do and where you are, and then maybe some of those myths that we want to debunk.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for the opportunity to chat about cannabis, as it is, even as I say this today, working in the industry seems a bit odd. My
Mm-hmm.
history, my background started working, my undergrad was in the sciences, so I was a chemistry major. I went on to become a chemist and worked at wonderful places like the Food and Drug Administration. I worked in the pharmaceutical industry. And even while working as a chemist and loving science and loving chemistry, I knew then that there was another part of science that we weren't exploring in a traditional form. And I say that meaning I came across things like, ginger root or echinacea, which were showing very valid signs in health and health improvement, but weren't necessarily considered valid when it came to medicine. And a lot of that came with my early studies. And once I became, a chemist working in the industry, I knew I was going to do like a PhD in organic chemistry or something like that. But as I was saying that to myself, my purpose was to find a cure for cancer. And I would say, I'm getting into science to find a cure for cancer. And the more I studied the medicines that were available, which were all new, chemotherapy was still being discovered, and the efficacy of those medicines, I started to really like dive into people who were beating cancer and were in remission, and they were doing what we call an integrative approach. And so they may have taken some traditional meds, but they definitely were doing integrative, meaning they were adding in herbs like turmeric or drinking ginger tea. They were doing mind body medicine, maybe adding in some meditation. So things that are considered non traditional or integrative or alternative medicine. And once I discovered that there was a very valid training program, which was a 4-year degree program where you become a naturopathic doctor, I pivoted. Instead of going into organic chemistry, I went into this program to become a naturopathic doctor. And in that program, you take the 4 years to study, you're studying pathology and, microbiology, you're studying the body, anatomy, physiology, you work in cadaver labs and understanding the very intricacies of the cellular system and the makeup. But then we take that knowledge and we use alternatives. We use plants and vitamins and foods to now heal as opposed to relying on the traditional prescription meds. I am not against prescription medications. I think they serve a purpose. But what I do find is we should consider other alternatives in the totality of healing. And so that led me into becoming a naturopathic doctor. That program, a course of study, was in Toronto. At the time, there were 8 accredited schools throughout North America. So I went to the one in Toronto. And then I came back to St. Louis and I started my practice of naturopathic medicine. And that's what I've done for, the past 13 years. Interestingly enough, being someone who is an advocate for plant medicine, who believed in plant medicine, who made plant medicines and did formulations and made, worked with supplement companies, and I made teas. There was in around 2015, I started getting, parents coming to me with children with epilepsy disorders, and they were speaking of using cannabis. I, like many people, I was raised that cannabis was the devil's weed, and those people who consume cannabis, like they were over there, and I judged them, and I thought, oh, they're never going to be anything in life, and I just had this was the misconception that I had. I think there, unfortunately, is the ability to abuse anything. We abuse food. Sugar is one of the most addictive
Mm,
substances in the world. We abuse, look at soda. How many times have you heard someone say they're addicted to soda? So there
right.
are many things that are addictive in nature, and it starts with the nature of the person as opposed to the substance. And more and more and more, we're finding marijuana, cannabis, whatever you name it, does not have that association of addictive nature as much as it does, as we know, to opioids and Oxy and Percocet, some of those very common prescription pain medications. So as I started to dive into the research and really take these parents seriously, because I have a child and I think I would do anything for my child, and I had to step back and get my judgments out of the way and my, preconceived notions and really look at it for what it was, which was plant medicine. And I was finding that the kids in my practice, when they use CBD, not THC cannabis, and we'll get into that, they were showing a significant reduction in seizures. And I mean, it was just so undeniable. So at some point, I had to say, this is really, really important. So I wanted to be on the educating end, take myself into consideration how I was not educated enough to know that there was some science there. And I think the world is still kind of unfolding this science and research as we speak. So then I had the opportunity to dive in. I had the opportunity to actually work with pediatric patients and see that they were showing significant benefit. And this was indeed valuable medicine.
I wrote down quite a few things.
Okay.
Well, I mean, the one thing I wrote down, preconceived idea of cannabis. And I
Hmm.
think most people do have that preconceived idea of cannabis, marijuana, whatever you want to call it.
Hmm.
Um, that's definitely something I want to get into. But one thing that you mentioned with the addiction, I don't even know if I'm using this the right way, but when people say it's a gateway drug,
Hmm.
and are they referring to marijuana, or and I say, "Are they?" I mean, I'm just kinda generalizing, but you often hear that, like, "Oh, you do this, and it's gonna lead to this." And
Right.
in my case, I think that I've heard, "Oh, if you try marijuana, then you will be addicted to cocaine." And it's like, "Wait a minute, what we just went
Hmm.
through some big steps there." So do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good place to start because the concept of gateway drug is it's an item that's not technically addictive, but it encourages the user to want a bigger high or to move into a more addictive substance. That has been consistently debunked with regards to marijuana. And just to not get overly scientific, but how many things work in the brain and how they work on different receptors. You have nicotine receptors, we have opioid receptors, we have cannabinoid receptors, which are the receptors that are used when consuming cannabis products. And those receptors all have kind of what we say upregulating or stimulating components or downregulating or depressant components. What has been found with the cannabinoid receptors is that they have more of a homeostatic. And what that means is they're more of a balancing component to the brain as opposed to constantly firing or constantly downregulating, which is more important to note. This is even less likely to cause further addiction or further need to move to more addictive substances. So that has been debunked and is still being explored as to why when we know that alcohol and nicotine and opioids are the drugs that often lead to an increased response or increased need, and often people seek to have other highs. So those will be more likely to be considered gateway, even though they're already addictive, and more so than cannabis. Um, the other thing I would say about cannabis, yes, it is also true that someone can use cannabis and they get to a point where they need more of it. Those users, those people traditionally only continue to use cannabis. So the evidence shows that cannabis users continue to be consistently cannabis users and nothing else, where that has not been true with nicotine, has not been true with alcohol, and not been true with opioids.
Very interesting. Okay. In that whole realm of things, something you mentioned a little bit ago about it being the devil's the
Yeah.
devil's weed, like everybody that like, you have some cannabis or you, uh, do that in any way, you are going to hell and all of
Right.
that. So, now that you went from that aspect to what you're doing now, how do you explain it to people that say that to you?
Yeah, I explain it as what you see now with the pop up of medical marijuana dispensaries and companies throughout the United States. What a lot of those companies are focusing on would be low dose or micro dosing of cannabis because the efficacy, the science shows that when you're taking a cannabis product in low dosages, it does have the reduction of pain. It does help with neurological health and neurological imbalances. It does help with reducing anxiety. So the education becomes around explaining that first, this is a plant. This plant that grows naturally and wild without us doing anything to it offers medicine. So it is our duty to understand the proper way to use it, the proper way to incorporate it into a healing plan, and then discussing how microdosing is really the best way. So even the advocates in the industry for this plant are saying, no, you shouldn't be, taking in large amounts of this substance. To really have its therapeutic effect is to use it in small dosages or small amounts. And you see that in the packaging in many of the industry. You see that in a lot of the conversation. So I love that even the people behind it, the businesses behind, producing cannabis, or even, promoting it as medicine and using it in minor dosages. So I really think it depends on what the needs are. And I don't ever want to tell someone this is it, this is the end all be all, and this is the only medicine you should be incorporating in your life. I would say if you never have to use it, but consider it just as you would peppermint or chamomile or lemon balm. These are additional herbs that we know that have similar effects, but not to the major degree that the cannabis effects are on the brain. So I really try to pull back and look at it in the scope of plant medicine. There are plants that we have access to that grow wild that are poisonous that we should avoid. You have an arnica flower that's a poisonous plant. We see um, good old poison ivy. We run for it. Believe it or not, poison ivy was used as medicine at one point, and still can be used in some alternative therapies in very tiny amounts. So there are a lot of plants that we have known and become common nomenclature to avoid or step away from. However, they don't have that stigma attached to them, just the same as cannabis. And for many reasons, I'm sure I won't get into, but there's a whole host of aspects of why this plant was singled out as opposed to, let's say, an arnica flower, which is also known to be toxic if you ingest it and cause much more harm than it would cannabis flower.
Okay, and that's my next question. I
Hmm.
mean, I don't I don't expect you to get into all of that,
Right.
but obviously we're having this conversation, and the
Yeah.
reason we have to have this conversation, unlike talking about lavender or
Hmm.
turmeric or something like that, is because it is illegal
Yes.
technically before,
Right.
so that's that's where I get confused. Like
Yes.
how did that happen? And to why we finally are here now. Obviously we know because of the benefits, but
Hmm.
what happened before to make it illegal?
Yeah, so there are many theories, and I really try not to stick to the theories. I stick to the facts. And the facts, from what I see it, it was, well, let me be clear. I always say facts are also subjective these days. So there were many initiatives in the early 1950s and 60s where marijuana, or cannabis, I usually refer to it as cannabis, was isolated as a problematic drug for many reasons, because many people can grow it. There's a lack of control for the population in the sense of medicines. If I can grow it, you can grow it, then we can't necessarily patent this drug. Um,
Mhm,
I give the example all of the time when it comes to white willow bark. White willow bark is a plant that has salicylic acid in it, and salicylic acid is common ingredient. It's what's used in aspirin. So if I were to grow white willow bark, I can have a form of aspirin that I could use for pain reduction. So what happens is companies, or we call it big pharma, or the pharmaceutical complex, was able to isolate this molecule and put a patent on it, and now they can sell it as aspirin. So you don't get the same exact thing that you get from the white willow bark as you do in the aspirin, but now there is a patent that follows. What we know about cannabis is that there was a very socioeconomic component attached to it in 60s going into the 70s, where it became demonized, and some
mhm,
of that people suggest was due to the ability for everyone to grow it. Some of it had a lot to do with impoverished neighborhoods and communities, a very specific attachment to neighborhoods of color, where if these people were found, if we were found with any component of marijuana or cannabis, then there were very harsh um, penalties placed upon it. In order for those penalties to be even more enforced, there had to be a level of illegality or illicitness to the drug, and that's where we got the federal um, mandates that were then stating that cannabis is a Schedule 1 drug. I can't even say how hilarious that is to me for someone working in a lab. One of my first chemist positions was in a narcotics lab where I tested oxycodone and all of those, known opioid drugs, which you have to really kind of be covered and suited and very protected when you're working with those, even in small amounts. Fentanyl was a drug that came in the early 2000s to be tested in the lab that I was working. And these are scheduled narcotics that require a lot of regulation and are deadly in small dosages. So to have a cannabis plant to equate to that chemically it makes absolutely no sense. So you have to start wondering what other reason would this drug, which is a plant, would be scheduled so high alongside cocaine hydrochloride, alongside oxycodone. And again, the theories were flying, but again, if you look at the science, just didn't make sense. And so when you saw the legality imposed upon it and the amount of people affected by this drug and its illicitness, it definitely makes you question why such harsh restrictions would be placed on this plant. And so definitely a socioeconomic component to it that thrives more so than the illicitness of the plant, more so than the chemical compounds of the plant, because those chemical compounds, which are now being sold in dispensaries in small amounts, are consistently showing that they don't have the negative side effects, that they don't produce the concern of, damage to the neurological system. I mean, that's being debunked by scientists across the world every single day. And now everyone's kind of rolling back to how did we get here? And it goes into the systemic um, racism. It goes into systemic laws against impoverished people, the class war. There's a whole aspect of that ties into cannabis, which unfortunately is now being unveiled.
I'm going to hit pause on the conversation with Jamila for just a minute to talk to you about one of the sponsors of the podcast, Blonde in Real Estate. If you're following the real estate market, even if you're not interested in buying or selling, it's really cray-cray right now. It is just insane. And what's interesting, though, is that there are a lot of people who haven't really been thinking about buying or haven't really been thinking about selling, but now they are, because they see what's happening and they see these great deals that are being done. And when I asked one of the owners of Blonde in Real Estate, like, what's your hot tip? How do people get what they want? She said, you have to know first. So if you sign up with this feature that they have at blondeinrealestate.com, you'll get a weekly update and you will learn about properties before they hit the market, which is great. And this is for sellers and buyers. And like I said, maybe you're not ready to sell or buy right now, but staying in the know to see what's happening around you could make you decide differently. So sign up now, blondeinrealestate.com, blondeinrealestate.com. All right, let's unpause the conversation and get back to it with Jamila. I have all these different things that I want to discuss with you about, and it's like there's no great order in how it works, but a natural tie-in when you were talking about the dispensaries, and we're going to get into that and how you're involved with that. But like, I think something that has come to my mind is, okay, we know that you are not supposed to have a narcotic like a pain pill unless it's prescribed to you by your doctor. You know that it is um, risky, or I guess illegal, if you go to somebody on the street and you ask for whatever that pain pill is. And so there's that. When I think about that, like when people will say, "Oh, well, it's okay because those items are prescribed by a doctor." Well, guess what? Now cannabis can be prescribed by a doctor. What I think is holding us back, and maybe like the seriousness of it, and I'm probably going to offend someone when I say this, but it's those pop-ups, those dispensaries, or those places in the gas station where, it looks like the 60s and 70s, the black light, the whole, hypnotic look where, you're just high and you know what I mean? Like, that I think is where there's this, like, misconceived idea that or preconceived idea of cannabis, that it is going to be something that gets you high and psychedelic and that's what it's used for, and so I think that there's some work that has to be done on that end, and I mean, you're part of that, but does that make sense to you, like, why some people are looking at it like that?
Yeah, and let me just step in on a couple of things. So first, in this state in Missouri, and I believe many states, doctors do not prescribe cannabis. What they
Okay,
do is they will certify that you have a medical condition that allows you to go become eligible to purchase medical cannabis. And so I think that's a good thing. That's a protection for medical doctors who are really unaware of how to manage patients using medical cannabis. So I just wanted to make that clear that doctors do not prescribe it. It actually is something that they certify you, and you can go. It has to be certified by an MD in order to have a card. And you may have a
okay.
condition. Conditions may include migraines, MS, a lot of autoimmune conditions, Crohn's, colitis, rheumatoid arthritis, epilepsy, seizure disorders, etc. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I have, uh, working with pediatrics, I will do anything for children because I think they are to be cherished and the most precious beings to walk this earth. So I love to support them as much as I can in health and wellness. But one additional turning point for me were the number of patients who were clearly addicted to opioids. I mean, a woman who had a root canal and was giving a 30-day prescription of hydrocodone. And I thought, what, that seems excessive to me. Um, so when I look at what is available, I think I really try to reserve my judgment because I do know people who take pain medicine. And let's be clear, opioids are not reducing pain. That is not how they work on the body. They create euphoria or a quote unquote a high. It just seems to be more pleasant because it comes from a doctor, it's in a prescription bottle, but they do the same thing. They give you a high feeling, a high sensation in order for you to not think about the pain that you're in. The only pain medicines that are really in existence are anti inflammatories. So when we think about doctors prescribing pain meds, they're prescribing medications for you to be high. And that's an acceptable form of high because I got it in this brown bottle. It has a script to it, as opposed to me going into this little dive shop and there's black light and I'm doing something to medicate myself. I being an integrative doctor, one of the things that I put at the forefront is for advocacy for health. I believe, if nothing else, this last year taught us to find the medicine that works for you. As many of us have, we're waiting for a vaccine. What do you do in the interim of waiting? You took vitamin D3 because there was science that's what they were doing in the New York hospitals, and vitamin C. There was more information about elderberry than I've ever seen in my entire
I
career
know.
because these are accessible medicines that actually worked to prevent many people from getting deathly ill. And so, what people need, they need medicine that's at their fingertips. They need medicine that they are able to control. They need to be able to be in charge of their own health. The last thing you want to do is have to wait for a test to determine if you have a disease and then have to wait for a vaccine. I think many of us felt the immense level of fear. So one of the reasons I am 1000% behind cannabis because it teaches us to be advocates for our own health. Whether you go to the doctor and choose an opioid versus going to find some place where you can use cannabis, the most important thing there is now you have a choice. You've chosen an opioid over cannabis or vice versa. There's no judgment there for me as a practitioner. I just want you to know that there are options. Unfortunately, with the immense unnecessary legality surrounding plant medicine such as cannabis, people have to find shady routes to receive this medicine. I would never buy cannabis on the street from someone I didn't know if I didn't know the grower. I would never buy that. And let me also be clear, I'm not a cannabis user, so I don't want to speak to, because that's not my, I mean, it seems odd. I know I'm in this industry, but it's not my go-to medicine. I will drink tea, herbal tea before I do anything. But I also have to learn not to judge the people who chose that high over the other, over the prescribed high. And I have talked to many patients who said sometimes this works and that high wears off more quickly and it's non addictive compared to an opioid that was given to me as an option from my actual medical doctor. So, what we need is the advocacy of individuals and that education of individuals so that they are more informed. What we need are facilities, dispensaries that are legit operating, out in the open where people can go in and feel comfortable to become educated and then make the choice if they want to move forward. What we need is a reduction in the legality of it, the illicitness of it across the nation, and then people are going to make their choice. Cannabis is strictly about choice. I'm not telling people, I mean, I talk to patients every day. It's rare that I tell someone to try cannabis. But if they ask, it is an option. I want to know that I could have the option between taking, a pain medicine or going to the store and get melatonin for sleep. I want to know that there are many options. Maybe I'll try CBD or cannabis because the melatonin didn't help me get into a deeper sleep. And if I don't do those, then okay, maybe I'll then talk to my doctor about Ambien or some other, Lunesta, some sleep aid. It's just creating access to healthcare in a more diffuse, more well-rounded, and more accommodating way that empowers each individual that's out there.
I did not know that. This is so crazy. Like, when you were talking about the opioids that, like, okay, so when that they would just get you basically high. That's what they were. They weren't there to treat the pain.
No.
And it hit me, like, whenever I have had something, whatever, like even my C-sections,
Mm-hmm.
that a prescription for extra strength ibuprofen, let's say, I'm like, "Well, where's the good stuff?" Honestly, like, I'd be like,
Mm-hmm.
where is, insert whatever so-called pain pill here?"
Right.
Like, that's on me for not knowing. I mean, I don't think I'm the only one, but I didn't know. I thought it treated the exact pain.
Yeah, ibuprofen is going to be an anti-inflammatory. That's going to be your go-to. They get into
Right,
some stronger
not some of the
emotions.
other ones.
Hmm.
Like,
Right.
I
Right.
had no idea.
Mm.
I no clue. I did not know that until this conversation right now. That's just wow.
Yeah. A-
Um,
And that's where I think that's where we all like, why would you know that? I always say, why would you have this information in your back pocket? And that's where, there's not enough room and space and time to educate the masses. And when, we have life and we have children and we have mortgages and get to work, and it's like, I'm not thinking about the ingredients of, ibuprofen. It's like people are, there are things that you're experts in. And I feel like that's how we are. We know what we know, and then hopefully we come together in community or in opportunities like this that you've provided. Thank you very much. Where we can now share information and data and have conversations about it.
I talk so much about obviously I need to take care of myself, but I wanna do it for my girls because they are young and I wanna teach them how to have a healthy lifestyle as well. Um, so all of this, like, even I've never really, I mean, I probably have thought about it in the past, but not as serious as I am thinking about it now, but even just going to a naturopathic doctor like yourself, that is on my list. Like, that's something that, um, I really definitely want to do because I feel like we have so many things going on in our body that connect with one and another and another and another, and you can go to your general practitioner for this, but then you have to go to this person for this. And it's like, well, how are they all communicating? And I had that conversation with a woman I work with that, like, you just almost need one place and all of these individuals that work together to help whatever it is that, you are going through
Mhm,
because
mhm.
the communication needs to be there.
Yeah, and not to make this sound daunting, but I tell all patients like You are the bottom line. I can give you a
Mm-hmm.
host of information. You should always research it. Your MD can give you a host of information, your rheumatologist, your neurologist. And then it comes down to you. What resonates with you? Like we are, experts in our field, but we're not experts in you. So when you go to a naturopathic doctor, we're going to sit down and talk about all those therapies and what feels right and what makes sense. And I often joke and say I have a team of practitioners because, sometimes you do get busy and things need to be rebalanced. So I can in my head think I know what's going on with me, but sometimes I reach out to another practitioner to say, hey, this is what's going, what's your feedback? And it's not that that person is, again, they're not an expert in me. They're listening to me. They're providing, another piece that I may not have been able to consider because I'm in my own body. And so you sit
Yeah.
down with a naturopath, that's an hour. And you have some MDs now who are getting into, they call them like boutique practices, who are wanting to be more integrative and give you the time. It's impossible to really get to the root cause of illness in 15 minutes. 1 hour is sometimes a challenge because you're trying to explore what's the next step. And, you are ultimately your own healer. You just seek out us to support you in your healing. Like I always say, I work for you. You tell me what you need. How do I help you? And then we go from there. And so there are quite a few that are burgeoning in the Missouri area. I've been able to chat with really good naturopaths or finding a more integrative or a holistic MD. And I have colleagues who are very traditional MDs, and it's not a slight to them at all. It's just that's not their style of practice, and that's okay. If a good rheumatologist is a good rheumatologist. It doesn't matter, if they are versed in cannabis or lemon balm or turmeric. You just want someone who's going to give you a once over and really get the testing that you need and whatnot. But sometimes in that case, you might need that additional ally who will take the time to go through all of those details of labs and testing. But ultimately, it does come down to you. Not that you have to be an expert in your labs, you just have to be an expert in you. What do I feel? I often say there are three things. Am I eating, sleeping, and pooping? If you're doing that and
Mm-hmm.
you ask yourself those questions each day, that's like your own little mini exam. And if you're not, then start to unravel. Is it something I've eaten? Is it some level of stress that's increased? Or is there something that I need to change with my prescriptions or with my vitamin plan? And just once you kind of start picking apart those little pieces, then you might need to seek out a physical therapist or some practitioner in the field that you may need that assistance in.
So I want to obviously tie back into cannabis. Another great thing that I love that you said was that you're not a cannabis user, which I actually think is important that you're saying that on this podcast, because it would be very easy for someone to be like, well, of course she's going to be an advocate because she uses it. And no, that
Mm,
this is not what this is. This is about you being a doctor, you doing the research, and you seeing what the results can be.
right.
So what I would like to kind of tie into, and I mentioned this earlier in the episode, that you and I had a conversation before, and one thing that you told me is, and I didn't know this, that if you can just, the average Joe cannot just walk into a dispensary. That's
Yeah.
not how this works. And
Mhm.
so I was wondering if you could talk about that and even talk about, who you have started working for to help with this whole process, to help with this education.
Absolutely. Yes, I'm not a cannabis user. I have inhaled once, but um, unfortunately, my drug of choice is sugar, so that I have to manage that once a week. But with all of this, and just I've had the glorious opportunity of working for Beleaf, and Beleaf at the time when I first was introduced to this company, it was Mitch Myers and Stephanie Cernacek. They were growing CBD, or the hemp, so the non THC form of cannabis. And they were working with patients at Cardinal Glennon, the pediatric patients who were having Dravet syndrome, epilepsy, or seizure disorders. And that was my introduction to them because I had patients who said, hey, I got this local CBD. And so I just was just a fan of them from that point on and just stayed in contact. And then this legal, cannabis industry started to take off. And because they've been here and doing it right, they have um, leapt into the medical cannabis arena and were able to now have cultivation, which are the growing operation for cannabis, and then manufacturing, which is where I work. Manufacturing is actually making the product for the patients, and then the dispensaries. So there are kind of three components to the company. The company that I work for is a subsidiary of Beleaf, which is Phytos Cannabis, and so we really try to bring in some of the high quality kind of science and merge that with the product in order to make really low dose products. So we do think about our seniors who are trying to transition off of opioids and having some really good solutions for them. So those are some of the products you'll see: tinctures, which are the liquid droppers. So, and then there's of course the edibles and gummies for those who don't like the taste of cannabis, so to speak, or don't want to consume it in smoke form. And so Phytos Cannabis, a subsidiary of Beleaf, in addition to Sense, which is the cultivation or grow. So once you have a medical card, so your doctor certifies you, you get to walk into a Suede dispensary. Suede is the third component or subsidiary of Beleaf. And there are five Suede dispensaries, three open now with two additional, and they're very well spaced out. You know, you got Ellisville, Missouri, you have St. Peter's, and the Grove is just in South City with an additional Cherokee Street location that's coming too. So you have many good kind of well spaced options. Once you have your certifying card, you take this into the dispensary and you're going to meet one of the very well trained, very well educated staff members who will talk to you about your needs, your health needs. They're not just going to say, "Hey, take this; it tastes good," or "This will get you high." They want to know, like, what do you need, and how can we assist you? And so you have it's a really good opportunity to, even if you got your card and you didn't want to purchase anything, just to learn a little bit more about what this plant offers and how it can benefit you or someone that you may know. And then you become the advocate and the education tool to support those around you who may be struggling with chronic pain, who may be struggling with some type of neurological imbalance, ALS or Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, which cannabis is showing to work wonders in. And so you have the Suede dispensaries, great places to stop in, chat, and just get a look at the product offerings. And if you can't make it out to a dispensary, you can check the website, just suedecannabis.com, and that will show you just what is there. There's some information about cannabis. There's information about how the plant is consumed and what your limits are and what you're able to purchase in a month's time. So when people are wondering about, well, if I do purchase it and how much can I have, all of that information is available on the website as well.
This is definitely a new conversation that is, I believe, being had by more and more people, and it will continue to be had. And yes, I hope at some point it's like just natural conversation. What I want to say is, don't, you are not on this podcast to say, hey, I'm going to hook you up with your medical card. Here's where you need to go.
No,
And this is what you need to do. That was
absolutely
not
not.
the intent of this at all. This was an educational piece that I wanted to make sure people were aware of because, everybody always jokes, don't Google anything, don't Google. And I mean, you would just be lost. Like, hey, what do I do? I don't understand. And
Yeah.
so that was like the main reason why I wanted you to come on and talk about everything. And I know that you and I talked before about this too. I liked how you said for you, when you are treating your patients, if it is cannabis that is an option, you like to treat it with something else. You don't just, you try to figure out everything that makes sense. And whether that is cannabis, whether it's not, you want to do what you can to help a person feel well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've had patients where we've tried simple, well, I don't want to say simple, but for me, it may be simple. Like, let's lower your blood pressure, and they want to try things naturally. Every now and again, you get a patient and they need medication. I'll say, you know what, you should follow up with your cardiologist because I never want to have someone force any therapy just because they think it's the best therapy. Cannabis is not the panacea. It is not the end all be all, but it is a great tool to consider in their toolkit.
That's what's always so great is the toolbox. As I'm recording with you, I have this vision board in front of me, and it's something I got from one of my devotionals for my Bible app, and it's like the toolbox. You've got to say, what do I need in my toolbox? My strength, my courage, my perseverance, my salvation, my truth. Like, these are the things that you need to look at. Just an idea. It was just like,
Yeah.
hey, just make sure your toolbox is full and
Yeah.
that you have the right things to get you to the next step.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. I never like to go into this with all patients, but I was raised that prayer is your first medicine.
Yep.
And when you start there, what comes afterwards is up to you to follow through with. So there are people who come in the door and they're just like, I'm feeling like this could be helpful. I don't want to get in the way of that. And there are going to be people who just say, absolutely not, I'm not doing it. I will support you just the same. That's why I always go back. It's up to you. It's always up to you. And it's up to you to make the decision that feels right for you and your household.
Before I hang up this conversation with you, Jamila, I mean, final parting words. I feel like you've said them, but just want to make sure that there's nothing we missed.
Yeah, you must know that I'm appreciative of this opportunity to be able to chat about, plant. I look at this as a gateway to plant medicine, like in a good way. Like people can now think about, tummy aches and I'll use peppermint tea or, I'll use some other herb to just help calm my nerves, like lemon balm. So I thank you for the opportunity, as I am an advocate for all people and the healers that are within you. I do like to let people know that, we were gifted many, many tools on this earth, and plants are one of them. And I think with all plants that we have at our fingertips, they are to be used with some discernment, with reason, and with, proper consideration of what your health needs are. I am happy that people are opening up, because opening up to one plant means you can open up to others and find that there are many healers that we have just at our fingertips, outside of our doors, in our gardens. So I am just honored to be able to chat about that on a regular basis. It lets me know that we're moving in the right direction.
It is time for the Supermom shout out, brought to you by Addie's Way. The nomination this week is going to Angie of St. Louis, and her husband Josh nominated her. He said that Angie is a supermom and a half, especially when she was traveling, having to take care of 3 children, but then she has to be a caregiver to a very needy husband at times. She's a successful corporate gal, and like I said, grinds every day. Angie, I see you and I support you, and you will be getting that special Supermom shirt in the mail from Lisa at Addie's Way. If you have a supermom that you would like to nominate, all you have to do is email me, hello@JillDevine.com, or you can go to the website, JillDevine.com, and there is a supermom shout out form that you can fill out there. And then that supermom will be recognized in an upcoming episode of 2 Kids in a Career, and will also get that special customized shirt from Addie's Way. I want to thank you for listening to the podcast and the support. And I would like to ask you to subscribe, rate, and review. So this is how this works in the podcast world. Anytime there is someone that subscribes to your podcast or rates it or reviews it, it gets a little bit more noticed. And of course, that's what I would like for this podcast to do, get in the hands of others that don't know about it. So I thank you in advance for that and for your support of 2 Kids and a Career.